Hello, everyone. We're going to start this lesson today in Access. Been a while since I've recorded, so please excuse my jumpiness around or not being as smooth maybe as Mary might be in some of her recordings. But what I want you to do is to make sure that you have gone into Blackboard and downloaded the Access files that you're going to need for working in Access. I have them just sitting on my desktop here. You can see there's multiple Access files in here, along with some Excel files, because in this chapter, we're going to learn how to bring file or records in, fields in from other programs. So the first thing you want to have is this folder available to you. The other thing I want you to double check on, as I mentioned in my announcements, is that you have Access on your computer. You should have Microsoft Access. You need it. If you don't, as I mentioned before, you can get access to that through your email. So if you go into the internet and go to how you log into your email, you'll see that when you're actually at this screen on your email where you see, here we go, where we see all the different apps, there is this option right here that says Install Office, and that's where you can go to install Microsoft Office that you get for free, and Access is a part of that. So that's how you can do that. And as I also put in my announcement to you guys, you have that option to call the LTC Help Desk if you're having any problems with that. So for now, though, if you could just go you can either start Access, or actually what I usually like to do is just open up the file. So the first file that we're going to be working with is called A1D1 WinWeb Design. And I don't know how many of you have used Access before, but you're going to notice that it's a little bit different in that it is constantly asking you to enable content. So I'll have to hit enable content here. And then, of course, it's not going to do it now, but at some point it's going to ask us if we want to have this as a trusted source. So one thing you're going to notice with databases is that there's a lot of you can have some trouble emailing them. Sometimes your computer might give you some trouble working with it, because oftentimes database type files are what are used for viruses, to carry viruses from one computer to the next. So any of your assignments, if you're having trouble with them, most of the time I'm going to have trouble receiving them from you if you try to email it to me, because a lot of emails won't accept database files simply because of the virus issues. So if we just look here, and I'm starting on page 3 in your book. If you want to follow along in the book, you can. I would highly encourage you to read over page 2 in your book. Talks about databases and how we transfer information from one device to the next. But starting on page 3 in your book, make sure you have the file open. And then we can go ahead and go to the customers table. So you'll notice in the database here on the left, we have multiple things, multiple objects is what they're called in the database. So you'll see here all access objects, little drop down arrow. If you're not seeing all the objects, would allow you to kind of pick and choose if some things are not showing. So right now all access objects is checked. If I uncheck that, and then I can come in and maybe just choose, maybe I only want to see tables, or maybe if you're only seeing tables and you don't know why you're seeing everything, that's how you can change that. I could only see queries, and you'll see how the title up here changes as well. So if you ever open a file, you're not seeing everything, that's how you would fix that. But all access objects we're going to keep open for now, because we're going to look at all these items here in our objects panel. So tables within an Access database, or any database, is really what's holding all the information in your database. So far we've been talking about working with paper files. When we have any kind of maybe letter or contract or different things that might come into your office that you're working in, and you need to keep a paper file for that. How do you go about filing that? Well, in a database, that's going to be different, because we're going to input information differently. So in one table, we might have our customers here. Here's all the customers that we have for our company. So kind of a small list here, but you're going to see that as we're working through Access. Our files are not going to be huge. So here's our customer list. If this field list window came up for you, I'm just going to close mine so I can see more of my window here. We don't need that right now. Since we have the table open, I just want to talk about the ribbon here. As you see, this this is very different than what we're used to seeing in maybe in Excel. If you've worked in Excel, I know many of you are in my Word class as well. So some things are similar here, like our font and such, those things like that. But everything else over here is very different than what we're used to seeing. Same thing if you go to your other tabs here, very different than what we're used to working with in any of the other Microsoft programs. So it might take you a little bit of getting used to working here in Access because it is different. We could click on our different tables here, going back to the information that's in our database here. We have a customers table, we have an employees table, we have an employee spouses table, invoice details, lots of information that we're inputting into our database. The main reason why we have different tables here is to help our database run faster. If you could imagine that if we had one table full of all of this information, all of our customers, employees, invoice, products, all of that in one table, it would be an enormous table and it would be hard to find the information we're looking for. So we're sectioning it out basically into different parts of our database. So those are the tables. This holds all the information that we have in our database, all the data in our databases and our tables. From there, if you look at other things that we have going on here, we also have queries. And a query in a database is basically asking questions of the data. So once you have your data in your database, what do you do with that data? How do you manipulate the data to use it how you want? So for instance, here we have this customers query. If you open up the customers query, we can see that we have our first name, last name, city, telephone number, and email. Now, the one thing I noticed, and I'll look here in a second, but the city is Bradenton. That's the only city that's showing. And my guess is in this query, the query has told Access that it only wants to show the employee or the customers that are from Bradenton. And if I go into design view here and click on that, I can see, yep, that's what it's telling it, is to only show us the customers from Bradenton. That's the criteria that we've set for that query. I know this is all going to look really weird to you if you've never worked in a database or in Access, and it's okay. You don't need to know this yet. I'm just trying to give you an overview of Access to begin with. So if I go back to what's called Datasheet View, or I hit the Run button, that also runs the query. But that's what queries do. It allows us to ask information about the data. So for instance, when you register for classes here at LTC, one thing you might do is you go into our system and you look for specific classes. You type in information. You're basically asking a question of the data. You type in the class number for information management, or you type in information management. Whatever you might type is going to give you, it's going to return the results of what you're asking. Sometimes it will return no results because it doesn't know what you're asking or it doesn't understand. But that's what queries do. And even though when we're working on it in a database, when you're going to register for classes, you might not think of that as a query, but that's what's happening in the background of the database. It's asking questions of the data. So that's what a query does. Very similar to when you think about the internet. And anytime you type anything in the internet, you're asking questions of the internet. It's searching through its entire database looking for that information. The next section in Access are what are called forms. So I'm going to click on this customers form. And really what forms are, most often, excuse me, they're used to input data into the database. So when you think of any kind of customer service jobs that you might have had, you might use a computer system to input customer information. You're really using this, what looks like a form. You know, when you're setting up a database or a database is set up, most people are not typing in information like what we saw in this customers table. They're not typing it in that way. They're typing it in like this. You have some sort of form and they're inputting the information. They hit submit or they hit add or something. And that's new customer information that's gone into the database. So that's very much what forms are used for, is to allow us to input information into our database. And finally, the last section, sorry, I'm having trouble with my mouse here, is reports. And reports are really going to take the information. I clicked on the invoice details report. It's going to take information in our database and put it into a nice looking form like this report. So you work in an office setting, in some sort of office setting, and you want to take information from your database and put it into something that looks nice. This is the way that you do that. You put it into a report format. Report format allows you to have like these categories that you might have. This is probably sorted and grouped by invoice number, and then they have all these different items for the invoices and then the invoice total on there as well. So reports allow you to just take the data in your database or data that you've gotten from a query and put it in a format that looks a lot nicer to read. And then of course you can add some totals in here. There's probably a grand total at the bottom. If we go all the way to the bottom, we can just take that information and make it look nice. So that's really kind of an overview of databases, and it gives you just kind of a brief idea of how we go through and work with databases.